I think it's especially good to remember and appreciate our religious freedom that we have, that we can gather together and hear teachings and meditate and practice together without fear, without the threat of violence. So that's a very precious opportunity that we have, that we often take for granted because we've grown up with it. And I think it's something to really appreciate, because if that circumstance of religious freedom weren't here, we could have so many other conditions of a precious human life and yet not be able to practice, just because of that one condition missing. So now that we have the ability to learn and practice the Dharma, let's really put our energy into that and not take it for granted. And remembering that we have this ability to learn and practice the Dharma due to the kindness of sentient beings. You might say, well, what kindness? Think of the people who made the internet connection possible. So many sentient beings working on that. Or the people who built the Abbey to start with. So we're completely linked with other sentient beings. And so let's do our practice with them in mind, and especially seeking the highest enlightenment so that we can repay their kindness by leading them on the path to enlightenment. So clearly first we have to actualize that path ourselves, and for that reason we're listening to teachings. Okay. So somebody wrote out a few questions that we'll start with today, as we've been talking about the four mindfulnesses, four establishments of mindfulness. So she says, we talk about ignorance and the other afflictions as being adventitious, while the virtuous mental factors are not. In other words, the afflictive emotions are temporary, and not only that they're temporary, but there is a counteractive force that can eliminate them. Okay? And we talk about purifying and eliminating the manifest afflictions and their seeds. Okay? So the question was, do virtuous mental factors also have seeds? Why shouldn't they? Okay? What a seed is the purpose of a seed, or the function of a seed, is to connect a cause to a result. Okay? So when we're talking about the seeds of afflictions, or even with the virtuous mental factors, there's a manifest mental factor. It doesn't remain all the time. Okay? When it ceases being manifest, it goes into a seed form. And then when it comes up and manifests again, it's manifest. Okay? So in the case, let's say we get angry at 1 o'clock. We stop getting angry at 1:01. We did really good. Does that mean that there's no anger or tendency towards anger in our mind stream at all after that? No. There's the seed of the mental factor of anger. And then at 2 o'clock, if somebody, says something we don't like, then that seed comes back as manifest anger again. So the same thing functions with virtuous mental factors. You feel love at 102, yeah, it ceases at 103 and goes into a seed form, and then later it'll become manifest again. And so it's the seed that connects the two, okay? Yeah. So this is a Abbey Dharma concept that appeared later, when people started wondering, well, what connects one moment of a mental state with another? There has to be something, so they postulated a seed. Okay? Now, the person continues, is this mental karma? Okay, now let's go, remember when we were talking about the non-virtues, okay? The last three are afflictions, yeah? So the virtuous ones, but I think they're afflictions that they must be conjoined with an intention at that point too, not just afflictions, because you're thinking about something, you're ruminating about something, you're planning something. So I think similarly with a virtuous thing, if you're ruminating and you're planning and there's an intention with it, then that would create some kind of mental karma, yeah? So it's not just, a mental state appearing for a small amount of time that becomes that pathway of karma. It's when it's really there and getting developed and enhanced. So it would be true for the virtuous and the non-virtuous ones. Okay? So, in terms of the mental karma, that you have the whole mental state there. It's not just an isolated mental, factor. You have to have the whole, you have to have a primary consciousness and the mental factor of intention and everything there. And there, that's going to produce a karmic seed in the sense that, there's a mental activity taking place, and when it ceases, it leaves a seed, and then that seed ripens in terms of what we experience. Okay? So here again, the karmic seed is connecting the cause, which is the action, to the result. In the case of a seed of affliction or the seed of a virtuous mental factor, you're connecting one moment of that mental factor to the next moment, the seed is. In the sense of the pathways of karma, it's connecting a causal action to the results that they're going to bear. Okay? Now, one of the, and we have the 4 results. Okay? So there's got to be intention. You have to have a whole mental state going on there. Yeah, it's not just a mental factor. Okay? Then the question was, in the absence of a controlling self, a person in charge of and directing the mind, what is the force that propels the movement toward virtue, towards a good motivation, towards refraining from misconduct, and so on? Can that really all be attributed to the cultivation of specific mental factors? If there's no person in charge who decides to cultivate these, how does that decision get made, and how do we reinforce it? Okay, so this person is saying, look, there's got to be a person there that's deciding to cultivate virtue. Because if somebody doesn't make the decision to cultivate virtue, we're not going to cultivate virtue. So there's got to be a real person there. Sounds right, doesn't it? Yeah? Okay. So let's pretend that there's a real person there. Okay? inherently existent person, substantially existent person. But there's a person there who's going to decide to do a virtuous action. Okay? Now, what part of that person, or what is the person that is going to make that decision to do something virtuous? Now, if you say, well, the person does it, well, what do you mean the person does it? Yeah? Making a decision, isn't making a decision a thought? If there's a real person, then you don't need a mind that is having a decision or making the thought to do virtue, because the person's doing it. Yeah? Because if you say the person's thinking and the person's deciding, and it's a truly existent person, then you don't need a mind, because that person is doing it themselves. They're an independent thing that doesn't depend on anything. So a person doesn't need the mind to make the decision to do something virtuous. So there's just a person and a body. Yeah? Okay, so that has some problems, doesn't it? Yeah? Because you don't need the mind if the person's doing it, and if the person's truly existent. Okay? But then you might say, well, okay, the person's doing it, but the mind is assisting. Well, what's the relationship between the mind and the person? Is the mind part of the person, but something that's independent? If there's an independent person, truly existent person, it's not going to have parts either, because it doesn't depend on anything. So you can't say the mind is a part of the person. Well, maybe the mind is the person. Okay. Well, then if the mind is the person, does the mind alone make a decision? To make a decision, don't there need to be other mental factors? You don't just have a primary consciousness. Because if you just had a primary mental consciousness, what's going to make it decide to do virtue and what's going to make it decide to do non-virtue? You need other mental factors to make that happen, don't you? Okay, so then is the person the primary consciousness, or is it the mental factor of intention, or maybe it's the mental factor of feeling because that's there all the time, or maybe it's the mental factor of conscientiousness that appreciates virtue, or maybe it's the mental consciousness of mindfulness that is mindful of the value of virtue. Which mental factor are we talking about that is making this decision? Which mental factor is it that is this person? And if the mental factor, let's say conscientiousness, is the person who's making the decision, then that person cannot also create non-virtue, because if conscientiousness is the person, since the person's always there, conscientiousness is always there, so then the person can never create non-virtue. Okay? So if we take this theory that feels right, like there must be a real person making the decision to do virtue, and we examine it, it's actually full of faults, isn't it? Yeah? We can't really say that there's an independent, real, substantial person there that's deciding to do virtue. Of course, it seems like it. I'm going to make offerings to the Buddha. I'm going to fight my self-centered mind. It feels like there's a real person there. But just because it feels like there's a real person there doesn't mean that there is one. Don't believe everything you think. Okay? Just because it feels that way doesn't mean there's some substantially existent person there. Okay.
So independence on these mental factors. I mean, so then how does the decision get made?
How does the decision get made? Okay, let's make an analogy. Let's say you have a key that's unlocking the door. What part of the key unlocks the door? So the key has no role. But what part of the key unlocks the door? Because your key has all sorts of little bumps. You know, you can't say one of the little bumps or another is what unlocks the door. And also, if you just had the little bumps, but you didn't have the metal that would made the rest of the key, you would just have like a piece of dental floss in that shape. Can that unlock a door? No. So what part of the key unlocks the door? Yeah. You need everything working together, everything cooperating together, don't you? Yeah. We give it a label key like it's one thing, but actually it's many different things together, and you need all of those things together to unlock the door. Because not one of it does it alone. Yeah, not one of those bumps, not, you know, the long part of the key, not the part of the key you hold. None of those parts alone can unlock a door. Yeah, it's dependent on many things. Okay, so that's the whole idea. Everything that happens is dependent on many, many causes and conditions. Nothing can happen just due to one cause or just due to one condition. Got it?
Well, think about it some more.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm wondering, regarding the first question about the seeds, and they also say that when there's a non-manifest affliction or mental state, that they say it's a non-analytical cessation. So,
Yeah.
So if you're saying it's a seed, but there's also a non-analytical cessation, which is a non-product or
Yeah.
uncompounded phenomena, then how is it like having the potential to do something?
Well, the non-analytical cessation is one thing, and the seed is another thing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they're two different things. Okay. The question I want to ask is that we always, you know, when His Holiness talks about karmic seeds, you know, now when he talks from the Prasangika viewpoint, he talks about the having ceased of something. Okay, so I want to know what, if you're purely speaking from the Prasangika, do you even talk about karmic seeds, or do you just talk about having ceased? And along that same line, can you talk about a mental factor instead of there being a seed of a mental factor that connects it with the next one? Do you talk about a having ceased of the mental factor that connects it with the next moment of the mental factor? So this is on my question list.
Quickly about that, I in one of His Holiness's books, from teachings he gave, he said that having ceased is like a kind of energy. So it doesn't sound like it's that different from the notion of a seed to me. Like,
Well, a having ceased is an affirming negative. Okay? A seed is a positive thing. So they're different in that respect. Yeah? But clearly there's got to be something there that connects a cause to a result. Yeah. So it can't be a non-affirming negative. It's got to be something there. Okay. Okay, so shall we continue on? I mean, I'm kind of thinking if you're really going prasangika, maybe you just throw the whole idea of seeds out. Wow.
And how would you teach it?
What would the Satantrikas say? We object. We're going to demonstrate. There are seeds. Okay. So we were in the middle last time of discussing the uncommon manner of meditation, and it had three parts: the observed objects, the attention, and the attainment. So we talked about the observed objects, how, and here the purpose of this section is to talk about how solitary realizers and hearers, how they meditate on the four establishments versus how bodhisattvas do. Okay, so the solitary realizers, the hearers and solitary realizers meditate, for example, only on their own body or their own feelings, their own mind, their, phenomena. But a bodhisattva does also for others. And in that way, that helps the bodhisattva cultivate very, very strong compassion. Okay, so that was the first thing, reviewing about the object. Then the second one was the attention. And so the hearers and solitary realizers are attentive to the body, feelings, mind, and phenomena as impermanent, as suffering, as the nature of suffering, and as not being a self-sufficient person. Whereas bodhisattvas meditate on them being non-observable, in other words, being empty of true existence. Now, this is from the perspective of the common view of all the tenet systems. So that's what the lower tenet systems were saying. If we talked about from a strictly prasangika view, because the hearers and solitary realizers realize the same emptiness as the bodhisattvas do, we would have to say that, they also see these four objects as non-observable. Non-observable means non-inherently existent. Okay? Okay, because the bodhisattvas, if we're talking, but this is explaining it according to the lower school. Okay, so the bodhisattvas meditate on the subtle selflessness of persons, which is the lack of inherent existence. Why, from the viewpoint of the lower schools, the hearers and solitary realizers don't. Okay, so that's a difference in the attention. Yeah. Then in terms of the attainment, the hearers and solitary realizers are aiming for their own liberation, okay? Or we say their own enlightenment, meaning the enlightenment of a hearer or the enlightenment of a solitary realizer, okay? Which means that they're seeking to eliminate the afflictive obscurations, whereas the bodhisattvas are seeking to eliminate both the afflictive and the cognitive obscurations and attain what is called non-abiding nirvana. Okay? So non-abiding nirvana doesn't abide in samsara, and it also doesn't abide in the personal peace of the hearer and solitary realizer arhats. Okay? So there's a difference in the attainment that a hearer and solitary realizer is going to get from meditating on the four establishments of mindfulness versus the attainment that a bodhisattva will get. Okay? Okay, so, yeah, that's good. Then the third point is the reason for meditation. Okay? So the root text says, the reason for meditating in this way is to engage us in what to practice and what to abandon with respect to the Four Noble Truths. So this is the reason for doing this meditation. So we know what to practice and what to abandon. And we hear that terminology come a lot, what to practice, what to abandon. We hear about the Buddha's realizations and the Buddha's abandonment, So this kind of thing comes a lot. And it's very important to know, what do you do and what do you not do, okay? Because if we aren't clear on that, then it's very difficult to follow the path, Because do I meditate on emptiness or do I not meditate on emptiness? Okay, so we have to know that. Okay, so how is it or why is it that these four help us gain a better understanding of the Four Noble Truths? It's because they counteract the four distortions. So remember our four distortions, seeing things that are impermanent as permanent, things that are dukkha in nature as happiness, things that are impure, yeah, as pure, and then seeing things without a self as having a self. Okay? And so if you remember, each of those four distortions was correlated with one of the mindfulnesses, which was correlated with one of the Four Noble Truths. Okay? So here we're going to review that. Yeah? And so, when you're meditating on these four, what to practice, what to abandon, it also helps you gain very, very strong renunciation and also very strong wisdom. Okay? So, because we see that all four of these they're all impermanent, they're all in the nature of dukkha, and they all lack a self. Okay? Okay, so through back to our root text here, okay? Through meditating on the establishment of mindfulness on the body, we will know that the polluted body is to have the nature of karmically produced dukkha. Okay? So our body, due to karma and afflictions, is in the nature of dukkha, or suffering, unsatisfactoriness. Okay? So this is going to help us counteract the distortion that sees things that are in the nature of dukkha as pleasurable. Okay, it's going to counteract that. And it's also pertaining specifically to the first noble truth, true dukkha, or true suffering, because the body is a big example of what is a true suffering, or what is a true dukkha. Okay? Then, so by mindfulness on the body, we start to see all the problems associated with having a body under the control of afflictions and karma. We see all the defects of having this kind of body here. So that's going to lead us to generate renunciation from cyclic existence, isn't it? Because if we don't renounce cyclic existence and, generate wisdom and get beyond this, we're going to continue taking one body like this after another one, and we've already had beginningless bodies and beginningless rebirths, so who wants to keep doing this again? Yeah? We just get to a point where we say, enough is enough. Okay? Now, but still hanging out in the back of our mind is, but the body can still bring me pleasure. Come on, it's not all bad. Right? Right? Can't the body bring some pleasure? Yeah? Okay, well now we move on to the second one, the mindfulness of feelings. And let's look at the pleasurable feeling, okay? and be mindful of the pleasurable feeling. And what do we find out? Okay, when we look at what are the results of the different feelings we have, okay? The feeling of pleasure is the cause for the craving that doesn't want to be free from, that wants to always have pleasure. The feeling of pain is the cause for the craving that wants to be free of pain. The neutral feeling is the cause for the craving that wants to have the neutral feeling in the fourth form realm absorption and above. Okay, and then if we look at it, craving is the foremost among all the impure minds. Okay, because craving, when craving comes up at the time of death, that's what makes karma ripen and throws us into another body. Craving happens all day long. That's what makes us create so much karma, the harmful karma. So when we see that, just a pleasurable feeling, it really isn't, it too is in the nature of suffering, isn't it? Yeah, it definitely is. Actually, the body, when we were, I made a mistake. When we were talking about the body is actually countering the distortion of thinking that the impure is pure. Yeah, I made a mistake when I was reviewing here. So the first one, it's mindfulness of the body with the distortion, seeing the impure as pure, with the first noble truth, true dukkha. Then this one, contemplating feelings, we see that all the feelings are actually in the nature of dukkha. They're all in the nature of being unsatisfactory. Okay, why? Because they produce some form of craving or another, and because they don't bring any kind of ultimate happiness like this. Okay, so when we understand that, then we also want to eliminate the second noble truth, the true cause of dukkha. So that's also part of renunciation. Yeah, when we have renunciation or the determination to be free, we want to be free from both the first noble truth and the second noble truth. Yeah. This is quite important, because otherwise we go, yeah, I want to be free of, all my problems, but I don't want to give up attachment, and I don't want to give up anger, and yeah. And ignorance, they say ignorance is bliss, which shows how ignorant the person who said that was. Okay. So we also want to develop the renunciation of the second noble truth as well as the first one. Okay? Then back to our root text. It says, in the establishment of mindfulness of the mind, through analyzing the mind, which is the basis for grasping at an identity, or the basis for grasping at a self, and we see the mind to be impermanent, and so forth. So with all of these, we're seeing them all to be, in the nature of dukkha, impermanent, empty and selfless. We're seeing all of them like this. So regarding the mind, when we see it to be impermanent and so forth, we will cease to grasp it as such an identity. Okay? And then we will no longer fear the annihilation of our identity, and we will be able to actualize a true cessation. So what this means is when we see the mind as impermanent, okay, so the mind is changing moment by moment by moment, then we see that the mind cannot possibly be a substantial self or a truly existent self, because it's changing. There's a new mind there every single moment. So it can't be some kind of independent, truly existent self. So if there's no truly existent self, then we don't need to worry about dying. because the fear of dying is that we're going to lose ourself, that the self's going to cease to exist. You know, that's the big fear at the time of death, my mind's not functioning, I'm separating from my body, I'm separating from the whole environment around me that's helped me to establish an identity. I'm going to go out of existence. And then, really strong terror comes and grasping at true existence of, no, I want an existence. And then that, makes the karma ripen and gets us into another body. When we see the mind as impermanent, then we stop grasping the mind as being a self. Okay? And and we also see that the mind stream is impermanent and it's changing, but there's a continuity. And we get a sense that the self, the I, is labeled on that continuity of many different moments of mind. And so then we know that there's no self that dies, that is reborn. We don't have to worry about the self ceasing from that perspective. And also that the consciousness continues on, so we don't need to worry about, that there's some absolute nothingness. Okay? So there, the mindfulness of the mind is correlated with the overcoming the distortion of seeing what's impermanent as permanent. And that's correlated with the true cessations, because when we stop grasping at the mind as an identity, then we have the ability to attain a true cessation. And here we're talking about true cessation also in the common way that it's talked about amongst all the Buddhist schools, which is that it's the cessation of afflictions and dukkha. Yeah. When you get into the Prasangika, there a true cessation is the purification of the emptiness of a mind that has eliminated certain afflictions. Okay, but in the general way that's common to all the schools, then a true cessation is, the ceasing of afflictions and suffering. Okay, then back to the root text. It says, through meditating on the repulsive aspects of the body and on the establishment of mindfulness on phenomena, we come to know that all thoroughly afflicted phenomena are incompatible with liberation and enlightenment, and that all pure phenomena are the antidotes to them. Okay? So by meditating on the mindfulness of phenomena, we will overcome the grasping at true existence, because we realize that none of the mental factors are going to be a real self or a substantial self. And we will also come to engage in the true path, because the true path is basically, different mental states and mental factors that we want to cultivate. Okay? So by establishing mindfulness on those different mental factors, we'll figure out which ones of them to cultivate and which ones to abandon. Okay? And so that's remember where we got into the big discussion about the afflicted phenomena and the purified phenomena. Okay? And so thus this leads us on the true path, and the principal thing of the true path is the realization of emptiness, or the realization of selflessness. Okay? So we can see that meditating on the four establishments of mindfulness, the first two on the body and the feelings, help us generate the renunciation that wants to be free of the first two noble truths, and meditating on mindfulness of the mind and mindfulness of phenomena helps us want to cultivate the last two noble truths, true cessations and true paths. Okay? Got it? This is kind of a review. We went over this when we talked about each of the different points, so this is reviewing it. Okay, then the root text says again, therefore, when these points are known and we understand these practices to be methods for turning away from harm and understand how to cultivate them, we will be led to engage in the Four Noble Truths. Okay? And knowing the Four Noble Truths is, the essential Dharma practice, isn't it? Okay? And so the text called the differentiation of the middle way and the extremes, it's called Uttananche in Tibetan, and it's by Maitreya. So there's a quote here validating this point. And Maitreya says, because the body is karmically produced dukkha, because the feelings are the cause of craving, because the mind is the basis for an identity, and because the path is the source of non-ignorance or wisdom, we are led to the Four Noble Truths. Therefore, meditate on the establishment of mindfulness. Okay? They always like to give a quotation from one of the scriptures, to prove a point. So that quotation synthesizes the whole thing. Okay? Any questions so far? Okay, we're going to go on to the next section then. So the next section is 4, which is the nature. Okay? So the definition of establishment of mindfulness, is a knower, so a consciousness, implying, when we say a knower, it's implying that it has wisdom, like it's a wisdom consciousness. But a knower of a person who has entered the path, which is associated with either mindfulness or wisdom, and which meditates after examining the general and specific characteristics of the body, feelings, mind, and phenomena. Okay, so that's the definition of an establishment of mindfulness. Let's look at it. Okay, so it's a knower of a person, so it's, a mind that has some wisdom. It's not an ignorant mind. And it's a person who has entered a path. Okay, what does that mean, to enter the path or enter a path? But what does it mean to enter a path? Have we entered the path? Why not?
Didn't realize anything.
Okay, entering, there's 3 paths, right? Hearer path, solitary realizer path, bodhisattva path. Okay, to enter the hearer and solitary realizer path, you need full renunciation or full determination to be free. So that day and night, all the time, you don't see anything attractive in cyclic existence at all. Okay, does any of us have that realization? I don't. Okay. So are we somebody who's entered a path? Well, not that one. What about a bodhisattva path? Okay, spontaneous bodhicitta, so that whenever you see some sentient being, the thought comes, I want to attain enlightenment for their benefit. Okay, and that bodhicitta, of course, has to be based on renunciation. So you need renunciation and bodhicitta. Anybody have that realization? No. So we haven't entered the bodhisattva path either. Okay, so the real 4 establishments of mindfulness begin on the path of accumulation of any of the three vehicles. Okay? That's when you really do the four establishments of mindfulness. What we're doing now is we're training. Okay? We're training in the four establishments of mindfulness. But when you really do them is when you entered a path. Okay? Yeah. So it's a knower, of a person who has entered the path. And that knower is associated with either mindfulness or wisdom. Okay? So it has to have either the mental factor of mindfulness or the mental factor of wisdom with it, maybe even both. And which meditates, and which meditates after examining the general and specific characteristics of the body, feelings, mind, and phenomena. Okay? So let's go back. It's associated with either mindfulness or wisdom. Yeah. So there's two ways that the mindfulness and wisdom can kind of come about. One way is you are developing mindfulness in the kind of mindfulness that is going to help you develop concentration. Okay? And through developing that single-pointed concentration, then you can analyze the four objects, body, feelings, mind, and phenomena. Okay? And you can see that the body is foul, that the feelings are suffering, that the mind is impermanent, that the phenomena are selfless. Okay? So there, one way is you go the route of mindfulness that is involved with concentration, because remember, mindfulness is one of the factors that you have to develop concentration. And then using that concentration to examine the nature of the phenomena. Okay, or this could happen another way, which is you have, you use wisdom, and with mindfulness together with wisdom, you analyze the nature of these four things. And then when you come to a conclusion of what their nature is, then you hold your mind single-pointedly on that. Okay? So there's two ways of going about it. One is first the serenity and then the insight. The other way is first the insight and then... Well, I shouldn't say that. Cross that out. One way is first stabilizing meditation and then analytic meditation. The other way is first analytic and then stabilizing. Because you can't generate insight without serenity first, because insight by definition is a unity of serenity and insight. Okay? Interesting definition. Okay, so you can develop it either way, yeah? So it's a knower, yeah, with either mindfulness or wisdom, which meditates after examining the general and specific characteristics of the body, feelings, mind, and phenomena. Okay, so whether you go first to concentration and then wisdom, or wisdom and then concentration, then you start, you're analyzing the general and specific characteristics. So the general characteristics were, foul, well, it's actually the general characteristics are impermanent, the nature of dukkha, empty, and selfless. Okay? And, yeah. Okay, where's I going with that? And then the specific characteristics, those were the general. The specific ones was the body, how, all the different meditations we had on the body, on the different parts of the body, on the corpse, on the skeleton, then the feelings, looking at the three kinds of feelings and where they came from and, their cause, nature, function, and result, so those are all the specific things. Okay? So there's a lot that needs to be together to actually have a real establishment of mindfulness. Okay? And so then they have a quote again from the Compendium of Knowledge. Who wrote that? A Sangha. Okay? What perspective is it written from? What school's perspective? Yeah. Chitta Mantra. Okay, but a lot of it is all the Mahayana tenet systems rely on the Compendium of Knowledge. They also rely on the Treasury of Knowledge too. But the Compendium of Knowledge says, what is the nature of the establishment of mindfulness? Wisdom and mindfulness. Okay, so that's the nature. So you need both those mental factors. Okay, so this is really showing that mindfulness is not just bare attention to what's going on. That mindfulness has an element of wisdom with it. Okay? Yeah. Because many people just use mindfulness as bare attention, but that's not really what it is. You know, it has some understanding that comes with it. Okay? And then the Treasury of Knowledge, which is by Vasubandhu, says the establishment of mindfulness is wisdom. Okay, so those are the quotations showing that. Okay, then number 5 is the divisions of the establishments of mindfulness. And our root text says there are 4 kinds of establishment of mindfulness. Those on the body, feelings, mind, and phenomena. Okay, we got that one. Okay, so do we have questions? Okay, our next point is very short. I'll do point number 6, which is the boundaries. Okay, and the establishments of mindfulness exist from the path of accumulation through the Buddha's ground. So when they're talking about the boundaries, they're saying who really has this? What's the first stage on the path, where you have it, and what's the last stage? Okay, so the first stage is path of accumulation, which is the first of the 5 paths, and then you practice this, and you actually have the 4 establishments of mindfulness all the way through path of accumulation, path of preparation, path of seeing, path of meditation, path of no more learning. Okay? Through all 3 vehicles. Okay? So this is, a lot of people think, the 4 establishments of mindfulness, this is just a practice that the Theravadas do, or it's just a practice that the people who follow the hearers or solitary realizer vehicles do. That's incorrect. This is definitely a bodhisattva practice. Okay? Yeah. So it's something that is valuable to practice, that we should practice. We shouldn't skip over this kind of thing and then just go to do Tantra. Yeah? So this is an important practice to do. And you can see why. You can see, how it's going to improve your concentration. It's going to improve your analytical abilities. You're going to, we're always saying, I don't know who I am. Well, this is going to put us very much well in touch with the components of what we call the self. Isn't it? Because the self is designated in relationship to these 4 things. So we're really going to understand what is this self that is the center of our universe. Yeah.
I think this would help with Tantra, because if you start looking at the mind and looking at the identification aspect, that whole kind of process we have of identifying, since that's what you're trying to do in Tantra, as I understand it, it seems like having kind of looked at it here would be helpful.
Yeah, yeah, definitely these four things would be very helpful for Tantra. Because you can see, first of all, there's mindfulness of the body as something that's foul. Then in Tantra, you're developing mindfulness of the divine body, of the deity's body. It's also a mindfulness of the body practice, isn't it? Except you have a deity's body that's made of light. Okay? Mindfulness of feelings, our old, distorted, unsatisfactory feelings. And then bliss in Tantra, feeling bliss. Then with the mind, identifying the mind as the self, and then realizing, first of all, that there's no solid self, okay? But still seeing that the self is labeled in dependence upon the mind, and so developing some sense of divine dignity or divine identity, which you're doing in Tantra also, okay? And then mindfulness of the phenomena, knowing what to practice and abandon, and then same thing on Tantra, you need to know that. Okay? So yeah, there's a lot of parallels, and you can really see how this practice is going to be a very good prelude for the whole transformative thing that takes place on Tantra, where you dissolve everything into emptiness and then think that your wisdom realizing emptiness appears as the deity. Yeah? And then you still have a body, feeling, mind, and phenomena, except they're pure in nature. Yeah? And you develop mindfulness on that as your object. Yeah?
I was wondering about the question that you just at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it that afflictions aren't mental karma, or at what point does thinking about something become karma?
Okay, so at what point does the
Turn to ill will.
Yeah, okay, like if we use the example of ill will, at what point does anger become the karma of ill will? There's a lot of other conditions. It's not just a blip of anger that comes in and out of the mind. It comes in, you contemplate it, you posit it, you kind of work around it and plan. There's an element of planning and an intention to carry through on that and do some kind of action. So that's quite different than just a blip in the mind. Yeah. And similar with our virtuous mental factors, we have to make them last longer than just a split second. I'm going to concentrate and then we're distracted. Yeah.
I don't know if I can ask this correctly, but last week you talked about being under the influence of karma and afflictions phenomena.
Mm-hmm.
And I found a way to make that work when you talked about the cup, because that seems so strange to me. Because all form is part of phenomena, right?
Yeah, but here when we're talking about mindfulness of phenomena, the emphasis is on the mental factors, because we're trying to figure out what to practice and what to abandon. And when you look at the 37 harmonies with enlightenment, they all have to do with mental factors. Okay? So yes, the cup is a phenomena, but we're not going to generate mindfulness on the cup, because that's not going to really spur us to liberation. Okay? Okay. Yeah. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
They don't have meaning? They're not any results or what?
Okay, so the blips of things, does that mean that they have no results? Well, no, they do have some result in that you're becoming more familiar with whatever that mental factor is that you had the blip of. Okay? But we want it to be more than, a blip, so that it has some power. Uh-huh.
So when you practice Tantra and you're working with pure phenomena, then that's why that's so powerful, because if you can keep hold of that and keep working with, for example, trying to become the deity, then that's why that's so transformative?
Okay. Well, Tantra's powerful for a number of reasons. Okay. But one of the things is when you dissolve into emptiness and then you think your wisdom becomes the deity. Okay. And then you meditate on the emptiness of that deity. But you're also developing the divine dignity of being that deity. When you're developing the divine dignity, you're identifying with all the virtuous mental factors. Why do you have dignity? Yeah? It's, because I think like a deity. I have the mind of a deity, not just meaning the primary consciousnesses, but the particular mental factors that a deity is. So Tantra's working very much to help us overcome, this poor quality view, because that poor quality view is entrenched with grasping at true existence and all sorts of detrimental, negative, harmful mental factors. Whereas developing, I'm Tara. I can look at this person who's swearing at me with love. I don't have to get angry at them, and so you identify with the love instead of just pre-programmed, somebody swears at me, therefore I must get angry. Okay? And so that's quite powerful to think, there's a choice in my emotions, and I can identify with love, I can identify with fortitude. And when you identify with it, that helps us actually create it, doesn't it? Yeah. Okay. So we're quickly reaching the end of the text. What I was thinking of doing was, because this text deals more with, from the Prasangika view, the gross or the coarse level of the 4 establishments of mindfulness. And I thought maybe after this we could do the subtle establishments of mindfulness, which is talked about in Shantideva's chapter 9. There's a section on the 4 establishments of mindfulness. It's tough. It's not easy. But I thought that at least if we go through it a little bit, it gives us a little bit of understanding. Yeah. Or another idea is we could look at some of the Theravada ways of doing the 4 establishments of mindfulness. They're very similar to this, but there might be a couple of things here and there where there's differences. But I thought it might be interesting to do Shantideva first. Yeah? Okay. Good. But when we do Shantideva, you're going to all look at me like, because one of the things is like, why, like the feelings, because when we're doing the subtle 4 mindfulnesses, it's all about seeing the emptiness of these 4. So one of the ways, for example, you see the emptiness of feelings is to see the emptiness of contact. Okay? And you're going to go, contact? I don't understand what contact is. Yeah. That's why we're going to go quickly through it. Okay.